Hi everyone, good evening. We are here at yet another session of editorial reading. Okay, this particular article has been taken from the Wire, from their science section. Okay, so what you can do right now is you can read from the screen, right? And what I'll do is as soon as I realize that you might have read the initial portion that is on screen, I'll keep scrolling it up. Okay, and once you are done reading the text, reading this particular article, what we can do is we can go through this article together and try to figure out the central idea of the articles. We can look at some of the important points raised in the article. We can also look at some of the words that are used in the articles, some of the from we can view it from the vocabulary standpoint, and you can also view it from a GK standpoint. There will be some points that will be relevant from the GK perspective. So yeah, so you start reading this article, right? And as I said, after some time, I'll scroll it down. All right. All right. So have you read it, everyone? You can let me know in the chat box, in the live chat. And we can start by getting your initial thoughts. If you were to write in one line what the passage is about, what would be that line? Or let me ask you more pointed questions. Okay. Now, my question number one is the author for biodiversity or not? Is the author for biodiversity or not? Okay. Okay. Is the author for biodiversity over functional ecosystem? The second question is the author for biodiversity over a functional ecosystem? Okay. Now this will involve a better understanding of the passage. I'm getting a yes, a no. Okay, let me ask a different question. Is the author for number one, rewilding or restoration? Is the author for rewilding or to restoration? Which of the two is a better alternative according to the author? All right. So to be better able to understand these questions, let us start, right? Let us start reading this passage, okay? It starts by telling us urbanization that pays scant attention to its biodiversity. I will keep underlining the important parts. And associated ecosystem services is destroying the Guindi forest in Chennai. Okay. So scant attention to biodiversity, destroying the Guindi forest in Chennai. The present day urban sprawl of the city is 200 times larger than the 6 square kilometer of the forest that it has engulfed. The biodiversity on this forest land is being depleted because of land use change. Okay, even if it continues to be eulogized as Chennai's green lungs. So it is being eulogized as Chennai's green lungs. So is it ironical? The biodiversity is being depleted even as it continues to be eulogized as Chennai's green lungs. So irony, right? And so at the start, what I want to make another point here is there's a difference when you read a RC passage. There could be a difference when you read a RC passage and when you read an editorial. Okay. When you read a RC passage, you are reading specifically for that central idea, main point, and maybe you are not dwelling too much on the specific details in the passage, things like examples given in the passage. You are not trying to retain every detail in your head. You are not trying to master every detail while you are reading a RC passage in the mock. But when you are reading an editorial, right, you can read each and every line with a lot of attention. One, because editorial is also one way you prepare your current affairs, right? And two, reading editorials is another way of knowing perspective around what is going on in the world right now, right? So when you read an editorial, you can read it slowly without timing yourself. You don't have to time yourself when you are reading an editorial. Okay, you can read it with a lot of interest and curiosity, and you can spend time on every paragraph, unlike reading a RC passage. Okay, now, so the next paragraph tells us the Guindi forest restoration has global significance in the UN's decade for ecosystem restoration. All right. As soon as I read this line, I come across in the UN's decade for ecosystem restoration. And this tells me that there is there's some UN's decade for ecosystem restoration. There's some thing known as this. And what I'll do is this becomes a line important from GK perspective. I'll look up this, okay, if I don't already know this. So that is what I was referring to earlier. When I'm reading the editorial, I am underlining and highlighting portions where I think is important from GK standpoint. Okay. And even after this, when we read further and towards meeting born challenge of restoring degraded areas, the size of India by 2030. Okay. And I'll again highlight this. If I'm reading it from a newspaper, I will highlight born challenge, and I'll make sure I take a note and I look it up if I don't already know what is this born challenge and what is that uh, target that has been set. It says it is equal to the size of India by 2030. Okay. Uh, uh, Restoring an area that is equivalent to size of India, okay, by 2030. And I'll again highlight this and consider it important from GK standpoint, right? So reading an editorial, as I said, could be different from reading a RC passage. Okay. Now, and in the very next line, it says, but this is likely to be effective through local initiatives that pay attention to human well-being within revitalized ecosystems. Okay. An important word here, but this is likely to be effective through local initiatives that pay attention to human well-being. And it looks a little oxymoronish that we are talking of restoring restoring, we are talking about biodiversity, and the author feels that it will be effective if we pay attention to human well-being. Okay, it looks rather contradictory, because when we are talking of biodiversity and restoring of forest land, and human well-being is usually the last thing that we care about, right? But the author says that this will be effective if we pay attention to human well-being. This becomes an interesting line. Okay, now reading on, this will require, in the case of Guindi, a rethink of what it means to restore an urban ecosystem. Okay, again, this phrase, okay, urban ecosystem, is an important phrase from the perspective of, just a second. becomes an important phrase from the perspective of the passage. Okay, it says urban ecosystem. Okay, not just any ecosystem, it talks of urban ecosystem. Okay, and we'll see why this is important. When 55% of world's population lives on 3% of Earth's land, these urban areas are effectively novel ecosystems. What would novel mean? These ecosystems are novel ecosystems, it says. Novel ecosystems made up of complex assemblage of native and non-native species adapted to disturbed habitats. These are novel ecosystems would mean these are unique ecosystems. Why are they unique? Because they have an assemblage of native and non-native species adapted to disturbed habitats. Why disturbed? Because their original form has been changed, right? They were diversified, they were biodiversified, but now things have changed. They are now disturbed, right? So that's why these ecosystems are unique in themselves. And since they are unique in themselves, do they demand a different treatment? Yes, that's what the author is alluding to. So let's read it further. A 2011 study found that a paradigm shift was required for urban biodiversity. Again, urban biodiversity. Okay, urban ecosystem, urban biodiversity conservation. And this does not necessarily involve restoring an area to an earlier natural state. So earlier, maybe this land had a character, had a form, had a shape very different, right? There were some 10 or thousands of species of flora and fauna, plants and animals. It looked completely different, say 50 years ago. But now 50 years hence, it has a completely different form. It has a different character. It has a different composition, right? So according to the author, when we are looking at revitalizing urban ecosystem, when we are trying to restore an urban ecosystem, it does not necessarily involve a complete restoration. How it looked in the past, it does not have to go back and become the exact copy of the past. Okay, it does not necessarily involve restoring an area to an earlier natural state. Okay, that's an important line. The concentration of humans in urban area requires that they become the centerpiece while restoring urban ecosystem functions. All right. The centerpiece is the human civilization. Okay. This is how now how the ecosystem will have to be restored. Humans, their their responsibilities, their services to humans, what they need, what they want. Now that is the central thing. That is how the design would happen. That is how the restoration would happen, right? Their needs and their wants will be at the center of it, right? And it starts from somewhere here when it says 55% of world population lives on 3% of Earth's land. And that's why they are novel ecosystems and they require a different kind of restoration. Okay. And then it says, yet humans can gainfully relegate themselves to insignificance when it comes to stewarding wild areas because natural ecosystems are best for removing atmospheric carbon and restoring biodiversity. He does make it a point to tell us that on the other hand, when it comes to restoring wild areas, right? Wild areas, then of course the humans will not be considered, right? They will go into insignificance. They will not be a factor then. But as long as restoration or revitalization is happening of an urban ecosystem, then their needs and wants will have to be the centerpiece. They will have to take the center place. Okay, and yet again, I would like to bring to your attention this word stewarding. Okay, some of you might know the meaning of stewarding, but here in this case, stewarding is used from an environmental perspective. Okay, so what you can do is you can look up the meaning of environmental stewarding. What does stewarding means from the environmental perspective? Okay, and then you'll understand what the author wants to say here. Okay, now moving on. Perspectives that look for natural order and ecological restoration underplay the functional aspect of the ecosystem. What is meant by underplay? Can somebody tell me in the chat box, in the chats, underplay? Okay. So underplay would mean not giving due importance, not given due importance, right? Less importance is accorded than its due. Okay, so perspectives that look for natural order and ecological restoration underplay the functional aspect of an ecosystem. What this line would mean is when we are focused on the natural order, okay, that restoring the ecosystem back to where it belongs, or just model it after or copy it just how it belongs, say 50 years ago. When we are aiming for that kind of restoration, we are not giving the functional aspect of ecosystem, how the ecosystem is operating in current scenario, and especially this is being talked about with the perspective of the urban ecosystem, how urban ecosystem is functions, right? An urban ecosystem, further in the passage, it says uh, it continuously reorganizes itself, right? Ecosystems are continuously reorganizing themselves because they are under the impact of human use, right? So the author is clearly distinguishing between two kind of ecosystems. One is urban ecosystem, and the other one is rural or wild ecosystem. Okay, so according to the author, these two will have to be treated very differently, and we have discussed how the author says urban ecosystem, the centerpiece will have to be the needs and wants of humans, right? And then it says the purpose is to restore or even improve, the purpose is to restore or even improve ecosystem services and not biodiversity per se to its original state. Okay, the ecosystem services would mean how the human is using ecosystem services from where he or she from where they are living. Okay, so ecosystem services would mean they'll be using biodiversity for their uh, food, shelter, drinking purposes, and general well-being. So general well-being of the humans, the services they have to take from the ecosystem, urban ecosystem. Okay, so that is what we are targeting, and that is what the author says should be targeted, and not biodiversity per se. How diverse is the biosystem, not that per se, but how the ecosystem, how the ecosystem is being efficiently used by humans. That is what is to be achieved. Okay, now Humans have modified their environment for so long that it is naive to say that ecosystem restoration should look for natural references from the past, right? This we have discussed. Okay, it has it is naive. Okay, it is naive to say that ecosystem restoration should look natural references from the past. Okay, even at the scale of Guindi forest. And then it talks about this particular species, Simai caruel, is an invasive species. Cheetahs are not native, and the native black buck had to be reintroduced at one point. What it tries to say is, even in this forest, how, as we said, right, in the beginning, how it looked earlier and what it was composed of earlier, what its character was earlier, what the species were earlier, they are not, some of them are not there, right? The black buck was there earlier, but now it had to be reintroduced. Maybe it got lost somewhere from the ecosystem. And these two species, cheetahs and this particular Simai caruel, are the new species that have entered the ecosystem. They were not there in the beginning, but now they have entered the ecosystem, right? So some amount of change has already happened in this particular ecosystem. Is this change desirable or not? Let's read further. The present day Guindi forest patch to the south of Adyar River and north of this marsh is part of a narrow strip, all right, all of this, stretching along Coromandel Coast. This region is often misleadingly described as tropical dry evergreen forest. Misleadingly described as, right? So it's not tropical dry evergreen forest, but it is simply severely degraded coastal forest. It is a coastal forest, okay, not tropical dry evergreen forest. And it is possible tall emergent trees that occurred in these historically literal. You can look up the meaning of literal. Can somebody tell me the meaning of literal? Literal forests. Look this up, okay? In these historical literal forests were lost before the mid 17th century, when parts of them were offered by a Nayaka. Figure out the meaning or the importance of this word also, Nayaka. Literal Nayaka. And let me know in the chat box once you have figured out. Of the Vijayanagara Empire to the East India Company. Sanchari, yes, near, Sanchari is saying near the coast. So that is the meaning for literal. And Nayaka, there were some military governors in the previous kingdoms of the south, okay? And you can look up the exact definition also once we are done with the session, okay? Then, and then, you know, I think now comes the main part of the passage, restoration versus rewilding. And this was the question I asked. In this historical context of modifications to Guindi, the reserve forest on Raj Bhavan estate continues to be degraded through illegal construction and ornamental greening. Okay. The bigger chunk of the de-reserved forest of IIT Madras is challenged by habitat loss and degradation. Yet the institute claims that about 65 to 75% of its campus has natural forest. Okay. So another thing that came to my notice when I was reading this was reserved forest and de-reserved forest. What would be the technical difference between a reserved forest and a de-reserved forest be? Okay, could be an important point from, again, from GK's standpoint. I can look this up. Okay, all right. Now, there is commendable effort to reduce the built-up area by removing old buildings and going for multi-story buildings to increase the green space. Okay, this is commendable effort. However, the growing population and increasing number of vehicles on campus continue to add to the pressure on green space. So one thing that IIT Madras is doing is going up, going vertical instead of going horizontal. That is commendable, but at the same time, the growing population is adding pressure on the green space. The very perspective of conversion of vast brown patch of land into a green space undermines the administration's claim. And what is the administration's claim? The administration's claim is uh, this: about 65 to 75% of its campus has natural forest. And what undermines the claim? That there is a vast brown patch of land which they are looking to convert into green space, right? This fact undermines the claim made by the administration and IIT Madras. Okay, we have still not reached the difference, the exact difference. We have sort of understood at a very broad level what restoration and rewilding could mean. It has to do with urban ecosystems and wild and rural ecosystems in under when we are restoring wild and rural ecosystems. Restoration could be the sought after thing. And when we are when we are restoring urban ecosystem, then probably rewilding is the thing that we are looking at. And that is just the uh, uh, guess. That is just a guess based on what we have read, but let's read it further. This brings us to the conflict between the two perspectives. Okay, on what it means to increase the amount of green space. Two perspectives, again, rewilding and restoring. On one hand, ecologists asked to restore the area to its original natural state, we understand, of trees, scrub, and grassland to encourage open landscape fauna like blackbuck. Okay, blackbuck, we understand, was a native. Okay. On the other hand, the Residents and Wildlife Club of IIT Madras seem to be advocating a let nature take its course approach. All right, let nature take its course. So don't try to restore it to the past, but let nature decide, let it run its course. Okay, so this is the other perspective. There are profound underpinnings to this difference. The choice is apparently between a conservative and a progressive approach to biodiversity conservation. At least one study published in January 2022 evaluated the different approaches to manage the invasive. And again, there is this species given, okay, and it's called invasive. Invasive because it was not there earlier. Now it has entered the ecosystem and maybe it is taking space of some other species. Okay, so this is the new species that has entered the ecosystem, and there was a study to evaluate, to manage this invasive species. Okay, and then these two choices were probably discussed. Okay, in a bid to restore native grasslands, it laid bare the complexity choosing between these approaches to conservation stewardship. Again, we have this term, conservation stewardship. Okay, do look this up. All right, so Bani is a 2,500-kilometer grassland where Juliflora was introduced 6 decades ago. Since then, it has taken over close to 60% of the area. So this species was introduced in the grassland, right? Now it covers 60% of the area, and that's why they are calling it invasive. Okay. The grassland degradation and high productivity of Juliflora have led to socio-economic adaptations in the local community, giving rise to a novel charcoal-based livelihood. So once this was introduced, okay, now we said that this is an urban ecosystem, right? Urban ecosystem, and people living there will take its services, right? Will take urban ecosystem, the services of the urban ecosystem, and one such service of an urban ecosystem is for food or for livelihood, right? And what it did in so many years, is the local community, they have adopted, okay, they have adopted this charcoal based livelihood. Why? Because the grassland was getting degraded and Juliflora really flourished. Okay, this new species flourished in the grassland, and this made the people living there, local people living there, uh, adopt a completely new livelihood. Okay, so now the decision to remove this particular species involves a complex choice between requirements of pastoralism based. What would this mean? Pastoralism based. In the chat box, let me know. Pastoralism. Okay, you can let me know in the chat box. Versus charcoal based livelihoods. So there could be two kinds of there could be two different ways of leading life. The community could either go for pastoralism based livelihood or charcoal based livelihood. We understand that as of now they are leading this charcoal based livelihood. They have adopted this charcoal based livelihood because of the presence of Juliflora in the grassland. Okay, according to a survey, 54% of respondents preferred charcoal-based livelihood as the primary occupation, and 70% responded with a negative attitude towards the removal of P. juliflora. Now, the local community is against the removal of this so-called foreign species because this species was not there earlier. And since we are talking of restoration, then this species will have to be removed. At least partly this species will have to be removed because it is now 60% of the entire grassland, right? But the local community, the people living there are against it. 54% preferred charcoal-based livelihood and 70% are saying don't remove this. And we understand the author's perspective. The author says, when you are restoring an urban ecosystem, the needs and wants of people become they are of prime importance. They become the centerpiece of that entire decision. Okay, so this is important. The study thus doesn't recommend the removal of invasive species from this social ecological landscape. So shouldn't be removed because people don't want it to be removed. Okay, the abundance of P. juliflora in harsh environments with poor soils and its utility to tourist communities has brought the state of Tamil Nadu also into a dilemma between livelihoods and ecological choices. Whether we continue with this or ecological choices, restoring, whether we go for restoring, complete restoring to the past, or we continue with the current livelihood. That's the decision to make, right? Experts believe that it is best to take a pragmatic approach. And what is that pragmatic approach in the local context? No strategy to, okay, so uh, it does not put out in as many words as to what the pragmatic approach is, but obviously the pragmatic approach here is to not remove uh, juliflora. Okay, and as the people from IIT Madras were saying, let the nature take its own course. Okay, and let the nature take its own course. Does it look like okay, does it look like a rewilding approach or a restoring approach? Let it take its own course, don't remove juliflora. What do you think? Rewilding or restoring? Okay, I'll wait for your answer in the chat box. But in the next paragraph, it will become amply clear. Okay, Prakriti, the wildlife club of IIT Madras, has been advocating for the preservation of wilderness and encouraging the community of engineers to live in harmony with wildlife. All right. This primarily means resisting the construction of new structures on the natural animal habitat, their conversion into lawns and manicured gardens, and the use of pesticides. That is okay. More subtly, they are also championing the prevention of unnecessary removal of plants, Juliflora, and keeping the undergrowth, retaining leaf litter and dead plant matter to enrich the soil. Let the nature take its own course, encouraging coexistence with monkeys and snakes, and retaining the unkempt wild look of the campus. Just let the nature take its own course. So Prakriti as such seems to be rooting to rewild their environment. Prakriti is rooting for rewilding the environment. Let the nature take its own course. Let the new species, the species that were not there initially, the species that are apparently foreign to the land, let them grow. Let them grow in whatever way they grow. Okay, don't change anything. Okay, so the restoration of ecosystem, urban ecosystem in Guindi forest, forest that is partly in the campus of IIT Madras. Okay, no need to restore it to the past. All right, that may not serve the true purpose. Okay, just develop it in a manner that the ecosystem survives, the ecosystem remains efficient. Don't aim for biodiversity, don't aim for increasing biodiversity per se. Okay, let the ecosystem grow, let the nature take its own course, and let the ecosystem become efficient. Okay, and let the need and wants of the people there drive what's done with respect to biodiversity. Okay, so no restoration to the past, but continue and let the nature. So continuing and let the nature take its own course does not mean continue with the degradation. Of course, the author is saying degradation must be stopped, and be comfortable with the natural animal habitat, and don't convert the green area into lawns and manicured gardens. Of course, all of those steps will have to be taken, but restoration to the past is something that the author does not really is not really convinced with. Okay. Lastly, not all invasion to be scorned, it seems. While invasive free roaming domestic dogs are disruptive, and this is, I think, in a lighter way, while invasive free roaming domestic dogs are disruptive and should be removed from IIT Madras and Guindi National Park, the invasive P. juliflora over the years has come to provide habitats for various organisms, and its removal will thus disturb the ecosystem. Don't remove it. Don't restore the ecosystem to the past. Okay. To quote Fernando de Peso, the unnatural and strange have a perfume of their own. Unnatural and the strange. Unnatural P. juliflora. It's not natural to the land, to that forest, but they have their own perfume. It will contribute to the ecosystem and biodiversity in the ecosystem in its own way. Okay, so this is how the passage ends. All right, so going back to the original question, and I will write it again here. Can you now tell me rewilding or restoring? And when I say restoring, I mean restoring to the past. And now you'll be able to answer this, I think. Rewilding, right? Rewilding is what the author is batting for, right? According to him, rewilding should be the way forward. Okay, everyone. So this was slightly complicated, I would say, because some of the words used you may not know the exact meaning, but the contextual meaning we got the contextual meaning of many of the words. Uh, but why this passage was a difficult read was most of you wouldn't have known this concept. Okay, uh, as in we understand that the desire always is, or from when we read an environmental related passage, when we read a passage involving a forest and restoration, it usually is a straightforward read. It usually is about how to increase biodiversity, how to uh, dissuade, discourage human action in the forest, right? All of that. But this passage had a slightly different take. It's not saying that degradation should continue to happen. It just gives us another way or another solution wherein the interests and needs and wants of human beings is kept at the center stage, and then biodiversity and that ecosystem is being restored. Okay, so if I were to put it simply, if what it means to say is, for example, that Guindi forest, the author says don't aim for restoring the forest to what it was 60 years ago. Now things have, a lot of water has flown under the bridge. A lot of things have taken place. A lot of reorganization has taken place. A lot of new species have come into the picture. Now take it from here. Okay, don't try to go back. And the author also, distinguishes between how urban ecosystems are treated and how wild and rural ecosystems are treated. Wild and rural ecosystems, author says, yes, go back to the natural thing. You just restore it to what it was. Their human factor should not play its part. But here with urban ecosystem, where human, it'll be naive. It says, one of the sentence said, it will be naive to imagine that, it will be restored to the past in toto. Okay, it'll be naive to say that humans will continue doing what they are doing. Okay, so you'll have to keep them at the center stage and then think about restoration and stuff. Okay. Okay, so Ayush is saying I am not able to comprehend some of the lines. So Ayush, what you can do is, so what happens is, it could be the case with me also. It could be the case with anyone. One particular line I don't get at all. Okay, but after reading that line, I don't get stuck with it. Okay, I try reading it once, I try reading it twice, maybe thrice, and then I move. Okay, then I move on. And as I move on, if I start getting the meaning of that particular paragraph, for example, that line is in one paragraph, I don't understand the meaning of this particular line in the paragraph, but I understand what the paragraph is telling me, or what that portion of the passage is telling me. Will I now be able to have a better sense of what that line meant? Maybe again, I'm not very sure of the exact meaning of that line, but maybe I know why that line is there in the passage. Okay, so that is fine. If you don't get a meaning of one particular line, some particular words, that is fine, as long as you get the overall message. And after we have done this, okay, you have now got the overall message. Now try reading those lines that you didn't get, and then try to make sense of those lines. Okay, any other question? Okay, so how many of you found it an interesting read? And just interesting, maybe you thought it was a difficult passage, but was it interesting? Because according to me, this was a unique passage. I haven't read a passage like this. What do you think? Okay, Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the passage was slightly complicated, but then I think once you read passages like these, and once you get, you get a completely different perspective after reading this, and that sort of, I think, makes reading worthwhile, right? Do you get satisfied after you read a passage like this? Does it did you get a good night's sleep after reading the passage, or do you get nightmares? I get a good night's sleep if I read a passage that is you know that satisfies me. uh, this was something which I had never looked at in this way, at the restoration and biodiversity. All right. Okay. So we'll only if I'm able to understand. Yes. But yeah, this is what we are up for, right? We'll continue taking up these complicated passages, apparently complicated passages, and trust me, once you read 2 to 3 such passages, you realize it's rather easy, right? Maybe I don't understand some of the concepts given in the passage, but then i'll I'll know them over a period of time. As I keep on reading, I'll know them, right? So we'll keep it till here. If no one has any other question on this passage, we can end this session. I'll just wait for a few seconds if somebody has a question to ask related to the passage or related to reading. And otherwise, we can call it a night. All right. So we'll keep it till here, everyone. Take care. Have a good night. I'll see you soon with another passage. Take care. Thank you. You are welcome, everyone. So this editorial, as I said in the beginning, this editorial has been taken from The Wire, from their science section. Okay. You can read it there as well.